And we are back on the build phase. I'm Mr. Ben, and today I'm not really going to talk about verses. I've got some sort of state of the podcast type thoughts that I want to talk about for a little bit. A couple weeks ago, I was out in the woods all week because one of my kids had a week long field trip that I was fortunate enough to be able to take the time off work to volunteer to chaperone. And during that week, the final episode of The Angry Chicken released. So let me rewind several years. This was not my first attempt at a podcast. I had been part of a few multi host shows, and often the division of labor just, hey man, are you going to take care of this? And then it didn't get to. There was a reason I eventually, with this show, decided to do I'll just do everything myself. But the inspiration for what I wanted this show to be, the kind of content that I wanted to be able to put on here, was largely taken from The Angry Chicken. So, for those Versus fans who are not also Hearthstone fans, let me talk about The Angry Chicken a little bit. So, this was a Hearthstone podcast, and they had three hosts, and one of them was very try hard, stats oriented, taking the game seriously, tournament type player. One of them was less serious, somebody who would play in tournaments but played more casually, and then one person was kind of like a full on casual. Maybe that's not totally fair. There's a little bit of squish between the roles, but the point is, the show did a really good job of presenting the same game from different perspectives, running the range from your kitchen table player to your try hard tournament player. And I appreciate all those perspectives because depending upon the game, I'm not a tryhard at every game I play. And all the games I play at a tryhard level, I also loved casually first. So I understand the kind of impulse to hyper fixate on tournament results and what things work when you're facing the best of the best cards against the best of the best players. But that's for sure not the only way to think about games, especially games that we love. Most of our games are going to just be for funsies. Even if you attend multiple tournaments, you're only in the testing tank for, 2 months tops. Like, that's not the whole year. So my approach with the build phase was always to kind of capture a lot of the spirit of what was happening on the Angry Chicken with the casual perspective and the tournament player perspective both being given space, and acknowledging totally that it's sometimes these different perspectives are at ends with each other or at odds with each other. While it's easy to say, oh, everybody should have fun in the way that they want to have fun, I understand sometimes the demands of the tournament players are completely the opposite of the demands of the more casual kitchen table player, and we need both, I think. So I've been listening to The Angry Chicken since before this show started. This show has been going on for just under 7 years at this point. And I listened to The Angry Chicken for probably a year prior to that. Now, when the show ended, when they put out their final episode last month, uh, they had over 500 episodes and they'd been going at it for over 10 years, or around 10 years. And this show has been kind of background noise to so many events. Like, the thing about podcasts is when I'm mowing the grass or redoing the floors, I have a very specific memory of putting the floors in at the house where I'm now raising my children, listening to The Angry Chicken. I remember when my oldest was young enough that they still wanted to play games with me, making a comment about how one of the hosts, watching the show on the podcast on YouTube, making a comment about how one of the hosts' hair looked cute, and I thought it was just adorable that my, at the time, probably second grader, was making those kinds of observations. I remember as Whit got older and got more and more into card games, that we would have the podcast on in the background, the audio or on YouTube while we played games ourselves. So these voices, Garrett, Joss, Ridiculous Hat, Dills, they've been both my focus and background noise throughout a good chunk of the last decade of my life. I was not a day one listener. I got into Hearthstone a little later. Um, but it's so weird to think about. Even now that I don't really play Hearthstone very much anymore, I would still listen to the Angry Chicken. Maybe not every episode, maybe not all of the episodes, but I would check in on the state of the game. And it's kind of, I guess, that weird sort of like parasocial thing that happens. Like none of these people know me, but I feel like I don't know them in the way that I like know my friends, but I know things about them in a way that makes it feel there's more of a connection with the podcast space, the small creators making cool things between the creator and the audience than there is like Marvel, say. I'm not gonna fumble around with words trying to specifically describe it, but I think you know what I'm talking about, or I will trust the audience to know what I'm talking about. So I'm feeling real uh, introspective around this whole thing. I've spent a lot of time on this mic talking about this game that I really, really like. The majority of my memories are positive, good things. There's been some low points, like, and that's okay too. We can acknowledge uh, that the trajectory hasn't been a steady line, always pointing upward. There's been some issues, both in terms of this show, but the game that it's about as well. But that's all just part of the journey. And it's weird to think about there, it's weird to think about there being a potential endpoint for what I'm doing here because I don't want it to end. I mean, it's also weird to think about, am I going to be doing this when I'm 50? Like, that's strange. I mean, it's weird to think about doing anything when I'm 50. Maybe that's what this all comes down to, is I'm just getting old. That's been a theme in several of my shows over the last few years. But I was reflecting on, so the final episode of The Angry Chicken came out, and I sat and watched it with Wit, and we had a cry thinking about all the times that we've spent. And, I can't necessarily think about this specific piece of deck advice or that particular deck list. It's not those kinds of moments that stand out to me. It's just the gentle hum of people who love each other and love the source material that they want to talk about. That they're there, like it's the passion. And if I do anything right on this show, I hope, even if I get the occasional detail wrong or I have a dumb take or miss something, I hope that the passion that I put into this comes across. And if there's ever a point where that passion is gone, then I mean, at that point, I will have to hang it up because I don't want to make a bad version of this show. Some people might argue that's indistinguishable from the version of the show I make now. um, it's I don't know. I'm just feeling a little introspective, uh, looking back over the body of work that I've created. The sitting down and the recording that I do alone, but the having things to talk about, that is very much a group effort. It's a collaborative effort with other people in the community. Without the game, without super awesome games making interesting cards that keep the game fun and fresh, and Upper Deck eventually printing and sometimes actually shipping those cards out to stores for us to buy. No, no, I'm sorry. I appreciate everything everybody does. It's been a rough couple of years. Uh, but all jokes aside, I'm happy to be here. I don't know if when we hit the 10-year anniversary, if this is something I'm still going to be doing. It seems kind of cool. I always thought the Angry Chicken would last forever, and apparently 10 years was as long as it got. So at the risk of being a little too weepy, a little too mushy here, I just today have a I've been thinking about this for a couple weeks since I listened to their final episode that I knew I wanted to say something about it, and it's hard to know exactly how to phrase what I want to say. Like that show was very much an inspiration for and a huge influence on what I think of as quality content in this gaming commentary space. And it's certainly had an impact on the way I approach making content and the way I approach consuming it. So I want to give a particular shout out to patrons of the show, of course, specifically Brad, Jason, Justin, Patrick, Peter, Roland. You guys keep the lights on around here, and I really appreciate everybody. Um, and let's keep it going for another 7 years. Yeah, seems like as long as Upper Deck keeps putting out the cards, and as long as I keep getting excited about them, I want to keep talking about them. So appreciation to everybody. This has been the Build Phase. I'm Mr. Ben, and you should go win some games.